welcome to Game Set Matchup, the podcast where we talk everything partnerships, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Welcome to Game Set Matchup, the podcast where we discuss all things partnerships. I'm your host, Greg Watts, and please welcome our guest today, Margaret Adam, Director of Product and Partner Marketing at leading partnerships as a service provider, Channelscaler. Margaret, hello and welcome.
Hey, Greg, good to be here.
Thank you for joining us, and hello down the road from Maid of Vale to Chiswick. Well, look, starting with an overview to yourself, perhaps you can tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are, your background, Channelscaler, and what led you into a career creating partnerships.
Yeah, brilliant. So I've always been in the tech industry. I kind of started out my career at a hardware vendor where I was dealing with partners. I've worked in a software vendor, I've worked in a SaaS company, and then I've actually worked in partners as well. So I worked in a distributor, I've worked at an SI and an MSP. So I've kind of seen partnerships from pretty much every angle. I also spent 14 years as an industry analyst at IDC. Guess what? I was looking after partnerships, right? So I've advised, I've built, I've studied, I've been a partner working with vendors. I've been a vendor working with partners. So I'm very passionate about partnerships, and certainly my whole career has either directly or indirectly been involved with that. So all of that experience, I think, kind of nicely led me into my current role. So Channelscaler is a company. It's a new brand, but the company's actually been a while. It was formed by the merger of two leading companies in the channel tech space. So I don't know if you've heard of Allbound and Channel Mechanics. So merging together to become Channelscaler. And essentially we provide software and automation to help mostly B2B companies more effectively manage and engage with their channel partners, right? And so we have a full suite of PRM or partner relationship management solutions, as well as partner program automation capabilities. So what I mean by that is if you're looking to kind of distribute market funds or pay incentives, manage inventory, do joint business planning, build a partner journey, whatever that is, we'll have an automation solution to support that. So everything we do is focused on the channel. And so as a product marketer, I wear many hats, but I think essentially part of my role is trying to understand what our customers, who are typically channel leaders, what are their pain points, what are the kind of problems that they're facing. And so we build that into both of our solutions and our roadmap, but then also in terms of our messaging and positioning and how we present market. So, I eat, breathe, and sleep partnerships really, and have done for pretty much my whole career.
I'm going to ask you this question. How did you find going from being an analyst, so, analyzing the partnerships landscape, which, partnerships as a concept or as a category or as a discipline is pretty new, I think, in the last 10 years or so, really. And only in the past 5 years, it's become more common as a discipline or as a function. And even now there's some, there's often questions about how does it differ from sales or customer success or account management. But what was it like? What was it like being an analyst, going from analyzing the landscape to actually joining a brand?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it was hard, actually, I'd say. Look, being an analyst is not easy by any stretch of the imagination. It's a very challenging job.
I know.
But you don't have to execute, right? So I would talk a lot around, cloud marketplaces and new ecosystems. I'm in the tech industry, obviously, predominantly. And I would talk about things like, going to market with multiple partners and partners try to collaborate and all of these things. And actually, when I joined, the next company I joined was Salesforce. And I joined it because it was a very ecosystem focused role. And I kind of wanted to take what I'd been preaching about and put it into practice, right? So one of the big programs I ran was a go-to-market, really, where we kind of looked at very specific industries, identified really specific use cases within those industries, and then designed the kind of ideal tech stack behind that use case, and then build a go-to-market around it, right? So and that tech stack would typically have like 5 or 6 7 partners, and some of them as big as the likes of Accenture and AWS and Salesforce as well. So trying to get all of these stakeholders to, everyone loves the idea, but actually trying to coordinate multiple companies and multiple partners with this kind of objective in place is really hard to do. So I think it taught me a lot of empathy and respect for people that run partnerships, right? It's not an easy job to do. It can be very powerful and very rewarding, but it's by no stretch of the imagination is it easy.
I was keen to ask you that question because I think it's akin to when someone works agency side and then effectively an analyst is agency side to then actually going client side and the delivery, you're responsible for the delivery and all of the things that comes with, and they're very different disciplines, I think, working agency side and working client side. But no, I was keen to get your thoughts and experience on that. It's quite a testament to someone that can do both. It's quite unusual. It's very impressive.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it has helped. Both have helped me. They complement. I mean, certainly my analyst role, I use a lot of those skills in my product marketing role, and I think vice versa. So I think having the two is helpful. And I was always conscious I didn't want to be an analyst for life, so it was a deliberate decision because I think it's I wanted to see this in action, and I think certainly I've been able to do that.
Very impressive. Well, I really want to ask because I know that our listeners will be keen to hear. How have you seen approaches change when it comes to creating partnerships? I guess also, you looking back at your as your analyst days, because that was, you were in the perfect place to do that. And what does a Gold Star partnership look like for you now, perhaps at Channelscaler?
Okay. I'll answer in two ways. I'll start with from a Channelscaler perspective, and then I guess what I'm seeing more broadly, both as an analyst and within our partner base, our customer base, right? Because we work with partnering people essentially. So at Channelscaler, we've always worked with consultants largely in kind of referral partnership, but we've got very, very serious about partnering this year. We're private equity owned, so we obviously have a very aggressive growth trajectory. And as part of that, we're really doubling down and investing in those partnerships. So I think testament to that is actually one of our senior hires this year was a chief partnerships officer, right? So it's quite unusual to see that kind of C-level commitment to partners, right? And obviously off the back of that, we are recruiting partners, we're building a partner program, and actually putting into practice a lot of what we preach to our customers. So we see partners as really critical as part of that growth story. And I think that elevation of channel leaders into the C-suite, I wouldn't say it's common, but I am seeing it more often, right? And I think that certainly in the technology industry, I think that's driven by real market demand, right? So if I think over the last, I want to say 25 years of my career,
yeah.
I would, I've seen a lot of change both in how the channel is structured, but also critically in the way that we partner. So, a gold star question for me is probably actually not that different to what it would have been a decade ago. And I think that it really boils down to this idea of partner value, right? Where there is a shared value exchange between us and that partner. It makes sense, right? And we're both committed because we are both getting value out of the partnership. And secondly, it needs to be very trusted, right? And so if you've got that value exchange and that trust, that for me creates a successful partnership, right? And there's other things to this. There needs to be cultural alignment, super important. You need to have a variety of different types of partners to perform variety of roles. So you need to have diverse types of partners, but there has to be a affinity or a cultural alignment. You need to be able to work effectively together.
That's a really powerful insight, and I agree with it, which actually is that a gold star partnership hasn't actually changed in terms of the definition for whatever, really. I think one could argue 10 years or actually plus, because as you say, it's actually based on two principles, a value exchange and based on trust. And those things have got nothing to do with technology or AI or innovation, and those things would have been in place hundreds of years ago, let alone today. So actually, that's a really good and powerful point, which is actually a gold star partnership is what it has always been, which is based on the principles of a two-way or multi-way, if there's more than one part, more than two partners, value exchange, and sitting kind of below that, but as the foundation, trust.
Mm.
But has to be shared alignment with how is this thing that we're doing together, this partnership, going to achieve both of our sets of objectives and help us to grow each faster, bigger, more cost effectively.
Yeah, exactly. And all the things you mentioned, things like AI or industry change, that will affect those partnerships because it means
Yeah.
that value will be different, right? But it's so the values that partners provide you as a vendor and vice versa will change. So the types of partners you work with will change, but those two fundamentals will absolutely remain. And if they're not there, I really don't think a partnership will be successful.
I completely, but you're the first person over nearly 200 guests that's actually made that point, which is actually a gold star partnership really is based on those two elements, regardless of technology. Technology can help accelerate, make more efficient, make cheaper, whatever the superlative or the adjective may be. But actually, a good, strong partnership has to be based on those two elements,
Mm.
like any
Okay.
like any relationship. So thank you. Thank
Okay. I didn't realize there was 1 in 200 there.
Well,
Okay.
but I think a lot of people no, but I think a lot of people, very reasonably would say that, with with things like AI, with technology, with other, with transformation, with innovation, that would be the leading part of the answer in their view, which is perfectly fine. But actually, the foundation of any strong partnership from the dawn of time has to be a value exchange based on trust. So
Exactly.
it's such a powerful point. Well, I'm going to link to that, if I may,
Yeah.
looking at partnerships, because after all, they are the lifeblood of businesses. What's your definition of a business partnership, and how do you go about creating them? Where would you start?
Okay. So I think for me, and I'll go back to the points I made previously, right? I think a business partnership, first of all, must be very deliberate, right?
Yeah,
There must be a reason why you're doing it.
yeah.
And associated with that, it must be outcome driven. Um, so, and you need to have that mutual value, that value exchange, commercial alignment and trust, right? So I guess deliberate, outcome driven, mutual value, commercial alignment and trust. And for me, it needs to be executable as well, right? So it's not just a handshake or a MOU, or a press release. It needs to be more than a logo on a website, right? There has to be that shared commitment to delivering results and outcomes, with both sides accountable. And they've also invested in the success of that partnership, right? If there's an imbalance on either side, I think it's people underestimate how hard it is to actually manage a healthy partnership, right? And so if there's that imbalance, it's probably not going to be successful in the long term.
I think they do. I think I completely agree with you. I think they do underestimate what it takes to develop, manage, experience a good, strong, solid partnership. Because a good, strong, solid partnership, you wouldn't necessarily see the challenges or the ups and downs or the conflict that may go behind the scenes. All you see is the outcome-based results of that partnership. But I think a commercial partnership is the same as any type of relationship in life, where a marriage, for example, you have to put the effort in to get to get a good outcome. It has to it has to be very much two-way, and they're not easy things to create. And as you say, anyone can put a logo on a website or a press release, but actually, what's that partnership delivering? And are both parties or multiple, or all of the parties, if there's more than two, are they all delivering equally, inputting equally?
Yeah, exactly. And are aligned on what those outcomes will be and what does success look like, right? I think that's key.
And those things are all really easy to say, but
Yes.
Uh, they're really, 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 really easy to say, easy to write about, easy to put as a set of bullet points. But actually living and agreeing to them, living and breathing them, all of the above, that's hard. Um, well, no, thank you for that. We might come back to that in a minute. Well, for all the budding partnerships people listening, What advice would you give to your younger self starting out? Perhaps the do's and don'ts of partnership creation and development. So looking back over the past years of your career.
Yeah, I think, and it's an easy thing to say, but really hard to do, is actually to start with empathy, right? And
Yeah.
try to put yourself in your partner's shoes. Um, if you take the time to understand their business, to understand their motivations, to understand the challenges, just like you would if you were dating or in a relationship, right? You can only truly understand what that shared value is if you understand those things, right? And without doing that foundation, you'll really struggle and many times to articulate what your joint value proposition really is, right? And why your partnership exists. So, it's empathy from understanding their motivations, their business, and then it's also empathy to understand their experience in working with you, both as an individual and as the company that you represent. I often advise companies to onboard themselves as partners and see what the experience is like, particularly large companies, right? Because you'll then get a lot more empathy in terms of, okay, what it's like to actually deal with us.
I've done that. I've never, sorry, this is like a first on so many reasons for this episode of Game Set Match Up. No one's ever actually suggested onboarding themselves through their own partnership onboarding experience. That is such a brilliant idea.
Yeah, exactly. And then you'll see all the pain points and, oh,
Yeah.
we're not that easy to deal with, are we?
No,
So, yeah.
but truly doing it, as opposed to going through like a process map of, oh yes, tick tick tick, fill in these details, yeah, but actually truly doing it as a new partner, like creating a new persona, a new business to properly onboard yourself completely without any guardrails. That's such a good piece of advice.
Yeah, it's actually, that's something one of my customers actually did, and I thought, that's absolutely genius, right? And
It is
and she
genius.
did exactly that. Yeah.
You'd have to anonymize it somehow, and as in you'd have to do it like people wouldn't know you were coming, as it were.
No, exactly. You had to be sleuth mode. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, no, that's it really. I think it's my advice would be to really learn and understand their business, right? And I see I was
Hmm.
guilty of it when I was younger. I didn't necessarily do that. It was all about what partners could do for me and not vice versa, which is, natural in terms of how you would think as a business, right? But I think actually to be better and to be more effective, having that really deep understanding will pay dividends.
I think so. No, thank you. Well, again, building on that, having created partnerships for a tremendous amount of your career, in fact, you based all of your career on partnerships in one way, shape, or form. What are your top tips for creating high-performing teams and winning cultures?
Okay. Um, so the most high performing channel teams are very commercially oriented. And so people in partnerships tend to be good relationships people. That's why they kind of go into that world, right? They tend to be very collaborative naturally. Um, but often or not often, I think sometimes they're not as commercially driven, right? And more on the relationship side rather than the outcome side. So, my top tip in terms of creating that high performing team is be very revenue driven, right? Everyone needs to understand how they contribute as an individual and how their partners contribute to pipeline, to growth, to, value that they're providing to customers. So, and linked to that is to be very data driven, right? Because how do you prioritize your time? How do you prioritize investments, and how do you measure what actually matters to the business? And that's so important because the channel team are often underdogs in companies, right? They're often under resourced, often under prioritized, often under invested. And I personally believe part of that is because there hasn't always been um, that commercial intelligence, if you like. There hasn't been that, in any sales function, you're very, very numbers driven, right? And partnering teams haven't necessarily been as much. So, being very data driven, communicating and showing performance. And then finally, so important in partnering is to celebrate the wins, right? And over communicate those wins, right? When your partners do something well for the business, talk about it when you win something. I think not only does it drive a great culture and a high performing culture, but it also helps you overcome some of those challenges around being under resourced and under prioritized, right? So celebrating and communicating the wins and being really focused on showing results and performance in terms that the business will understand.
That's such brilliant advice, because in my opinion, we're still at a point with partnerships, and this is kind of what I guess, talking about at the start, which is, even though partnerships as a construct, division, function have been around in different shapes and sizes for some years, I think there's a much better understanding now. But I think within some organizations there still can be a question mark about what are they here to do over and above the sales team or the customer success team or the account management team. And so articulating, as you say, the wins, but commercially what those wins are as well, will make people think, oh okay, so this is what they do. Oh wow, we couldn't have done this without them, and this is how they're different from sales or customer success or whoever else it may be. That's brilliant advice. I think we can sometimes, well, just not do that.
No, exactly. And to convince the naysayers and the skeptics, it's really important to do that. And I think, in many companies where you do have a direct sales force, you've always got that conflict between kind of channel and direct, right? But if you communicate those wins and you make a hero of the salesperson that was involved in that project, right, all of a sudden they become an advocate for you within that sales team.
Yeah.
And other salespeople go, oh well, look what they achieved, working with the partner. I want to do that too, right? And so you can start to really drive behavioral change within the business if you do that.
But that, again, that's a fantastic point, is do it through being hyper collaborative. I mean, we shouldn't have to say hyper collaborative, but almost being over collaborative to demonstrate the benefits that you can drive for the organization and for the individuals within it, if that is indeed the sales team, by showing how we can do this together and achieve, to your point throughout this podcast, a win-win for everybody based on what all of our objectives are.
Yeah, exactly. And communicating in those terms, I think, is super important.
Thank you. Well, finally, to round us off, one last question, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
What does the future hold for businesses when it comes to creating partnerships with each other? And what, if anything, will you and Channelscaler be doing differently?
Okay, now I am going to talk about technology.
Oh, it's not a bad word. It's not a bad word. It's a good word. It moves things faster. So,
Well, sort of. I think
yeah.
it does, obviously, but I think I've touched on ecosystem a couple of times, but I think what's really going to differentiate is really embracing that ecosystem thinking, right? So, but that, I mean, it's not just about adding more partners. It's about being very intentional around the relationships that you have and looking at those very high impact relationships, but then appreciating that you're going to work a lot more collaboratively, right? So I don't know if you know Jay McBain from Canalys. He always talks about this kind of 28 moments of influence, right? So what that means is, before a company's even made a decision on, this is in the technology sector again, on what product they're going to buy, there is 28 other influencers, and a lot of those are your partners, right? So, and they may not look like a traditional partner. They could be a community, or they could be an influencer, right? There's all sorts of different flavors of that. And then I think linked to that, and we certainly see this day in and day out now, is that there's not just one partner, one deal, right? In any sizable customer, you're going to have a reliance of 6 or 7 partners doing different activities and different roles. You have to be very intentional and being very clear on what roles do we need partners to perform, and that will drive what kind of partners you'll be looking for. I also talk about ecosystem a lot in terms of all of the C's, right? So, there's going to be much greater collaboration, not just between you and your partner, but between your partners, right? So you're going to have these multi-partner collaboration in either a single opportunity, a single solution, or a single account, right? Then there'll be co-creation, right? And certainly cloud and AI are accelerating that, where there's partners that you will go into, joint solution development in the truest form, but you will also then start to share intellectual property and IP, and this has got significant implications in terms of the monetization and the commercial relationships you have with your partners. So it's going to get you're going to have this idea of this, co-developed, co-created IP, and then you've got the go-to-market around that. So we talk about it in terms of co-selling and co-marketing, which is really where your salespeople have to be working with the partner salespeople, and there might be 6 or 7 of those partners in an opportunity, right? And and to your point earlier, it's really complex and it's really difficult to execute. So you do have to invest in technology to help you to manage all of these workflows and all of these relationships. And then I think, there's new routes to market, like cloud and AI marketplaces, which are, performing all sorts of partnering functions in many respects, right? So, from a Channelscaler perspective, we're thinking about all of those C's and kind of what it means. And so, thinking about what are the kind of partnerships we need built to support that. But then also, what is the go-to-market strategy to support all those dynamics? And then from our own perspective, what is the technology we need to provide to our customers to be able to co-sell, co-market, co-create with their partners, right? So it's a really interesting time in the industry. I think the nature of partnerships I think one of the reasons why partnerships are being elevated into the C-suite is because it's almost impossible to do it all. This is the rate of change and the impact that technology is having, right? It's just too hard to do it all by yourself. So it necessitates having to work with partners, and then the nature of those partnerships, as I say, is evolving quite rapidly. So fun time in the industry. I think there's lots of goodness, but it's certainly none of this is easy to get right.
Well, it's exciting. Well, I know that we could talk for a lot longer about this, but it's nearly the weekend, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us on Game Set Match Up, and maybe you could come back at some point in the future and we can reflect on where we are compared to where we compared to right now. But Margaret Adam from Channelscaler, thank you so much for joining us on Game Set Match Up.
Thank you so much, Greg. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Take care.
Have a lovely weekend.
And you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining this week's Game Set Matchup. Tune in to hear more about the need to knows and the do's and don'ts when it comes to creating successful business partnerships.